Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Linda Bradford, and we're here today with a true innovator in education, Cahlan Sharp. And he has really done a tremendous amount of work in helping people learn better. And he's developed 3 different companies that I know of, and maybe more. And he's going to share his journey with us today. Yesterday afternoon, as I was on a remote call with one of my engineers, my eye caught a little piece of paper, this little blue piece of paper, and I looked at it, and here it says Cahlan Sharp. This is from our program 10 years ago.
There you go.
And it
Yeah, that's
just
an old
was
email address.
sticking out of my
Hilarious.
dissertation. So is a good omen for
There
us
you go.
today. So beyond his great track record as a founder, Kalyn is passionate about creating accessible, engaging, and personalized learning for all. His work at the intersection of education, technology, and entrepreneurship continues to inspire us all. And as my husband tells me, he's also a great golfer.
Not as good as your husband, but I try.
Tell us a little bit about your journey. Like, how did you start out? What is your background? I'm sure everyone would love to know.
Yeah, I think it's probably helpful to note that, you know, I'm a child of the internet in the sense that I've grown up in an era where learning has become more and more accessible,
Right.
more than ever before. You know, I started as a kid. I remember going to the library and checking out books. I remember getting encyclopedias.
Right.
But then sometime around junior high school, you know, the internet kind of became a thing. And I remember me and a friend in his bedroom at night working on our first website together, just kind of
Wow.
piecing it together. And we didn't know what we were doing. It was just like, wow, this is cool. And how does this work? And how do you do images and stuff like that? So kind of learning the basics of HTML just in this very small little pocket. Nobody even understood what the internet was going to be back then. It was just sort of like, this is this interesting thing you can do, is get online or send
Right.
email or whatever.
Right.
But then when I got older and I'm in school and I'm trying to figure out what I want to do, it was sort of like, it just became a much bigger part of my life, in the sense that, you know, I started realizing like, oh, if I build websites for fun, what if I built them also for people and for businesses, and started playing around with contract work, and ended up getting my first job out of undergraduate, working for a large organization and building multimedia applications. And so got
Wow.
exposed to things like video encoding and compression and, you know, internet deployments of different things. And so I feel like I've grown up with the internet in a way.
Right.
And it's fascinating, and it's really been such an important part of my journey, because I'm a builder at heart. I have to build. I want to get my hands on things. And so with web technology especially, there's just so much you can do to kind of create something and put it out there immediately.
Right.
It's not
Right.
like a, you know, say like wood shop or something where you spend hours and hours kind of in a garage or something and then you go take it. This is something that you can experiment with very easily.
Right.
It lends itself to, I don't even know if this is a word, but iterability, right? Like it lends itself to kind of iterating very fast on something and making changes and trying something out.
Right.
And of course, that's what we've seen with software companies, is that they've become these machines of just like learning and innovation, because you're able to experiment with something, try it, and you have all this rich data and you have all this technology you can use to make it better. So I feel like, you know, again, an important part of my journey is growing up with the internet. Also, another important part of my journey clearly is education.
Right.
Early on, I found a passion for teaching and learning, and just so happened that some of my first career moves in technology were with companies that were deeply invested in education. So I was building learning platforms, or I was building, you know, multimedia kiosks and things like that. So it was always kind of in the service of helping somebody get a message or helping somebody learn something.
Yes.
And so for me, the master's degree came into play there, because it was
Yes.
like, well, if I'm gonna build this stuff, maybe I should understand more about the science and
Learning.
psychology behind learning. And so
Exactly.
that's what led me to the master's program at BYU, and learned a lot of great theory and psychology and design principles there. And just, you know, was able to immediately apply those into what I was doing, because I was already working, you know, building learning platforms and learning tools and things like that. So I would say, you know, it started off as kind of a, you know, close combination, and it's just stayed there ever since. I spent, you know, roughly 8 or so years just kind of getting my stripes, you know, and understanding how technology works, and getting better at coding. And I really consider myself mostly a self-taught engineer. Because I didn't do a computer science program. I learned a lot of it just on my own, building and working and sort of on the job training.
Very admirable.
Well, it was hard. It was very hard. And that's actually one of the reasons why one of my first successful ventures ended up being DevMountain, because so DevMountain, for those who don't know, was a coding school in Utah,
Amazing.
first of its kind in Utah. The impetus was I was starting a new role. I just moved back to Utah from San Francisco. I had been there with a startup for a couple of years, ultimately didn't work out. And as I was coming back to Utah, I was having one of those sort of like, what does it all mean kind of moments where it's like, what?
Existential crisis.
Yeah, existential crisis. What am I here to do? Like,
Right.
what is my dent in the universe?
Yes.
And it wasn't, the job that I was working at, the company I was working with was great. The people were great, but it was like, I just felt like there was something more that I could do besides just building software, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, it was really hard for me to learn this stuff on my own. It was very difficult. And what I was seeing coming out of traditional, computer science programs and what people were trying to accomplish, it seemed very disconnected, right? You had companies, including our own, that were hiring for talent, and yet the talent that was coming out of these programs, first of all, after many years and a lot of student debt and things like that, wasn't really matching what the market needed.
There's always that gap
Yeah.
between academia and business.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, brainstormed with some friends, like, what if you just completely flip that around? Like, what if you took the way that I learned on the job and you kind of applied that to everybody and said, this is how you learn, is you learn by doing and you learn on the job. You don't,
Yes.
the analogy I used to make a lot was, rather than trying to learn, French by learning Latin first and all the ancient principles and then learning French, what if you just started by learning French? And what if you started by being dropped in the middle of Paris and that's how you learn French? You understand
Yes.
these principles very well.
Right.
And so that was kind of how we approached this code. We called it a coding bootcamp because it was meant to be you're thrown in the deep end. And it's a lot of information very quickly. Right. And it was really successful. I started teaching part-time classes, kind of nights and weekends, because I was still working my full-time job. Mm-hmm. And it was just fascinating. First of all, it was fascinating what these people could learn in a short amount of time. I think we really didn't understand when we first got started how much more quickly we could learn. I think sometimes maybe we don't give people enough credit, and we underestimate their abilities perhaps. And so, they were able to learn incredible amounts of information in a short amount of time. And some of their outcomes were just blowing me away. Like some of these people after a part-time class were able to completely pivot their careers and get into an entirely new space.
And that's such a great feeling when you've helped someone do that.
Exactly. And that really was where it took root in me, because I thought, what more impactful thing could you do than helping, first of all, from a personal human perspective, helping somebody to be gainfully employed in something they love. I mean, that's a huge factor, right?
It's huge.
Huge. And from a larger perspective, from a broader perspective, how better to address the talent gap than by directly helping, get more workers into the marketplace, get more employable people in the marketplace. So,
and it was extremely successful.
Yeah, it was a great program.
We heard about DevMountain constantly.
Yeah.
And I was very proud of you for doing that.
Thank you. It evolved a lot over the years. We, pretty soon realized it was a much bigger thing than just part-time and weekend classes. So we started a full-time program. We had multiple classes and cohorts going. At one point, we had 3 or 4 locations simultaneously between Salt Lake and Dallas, Texas, and Phoenix, Arizona, and one for a little bit in Minneapolis. So we were kind of all over the place. It was very stressful, as growing companies can be.
Right.
But it was fun, and it was fun not just because it was fun, but it was fun because we were doing something that felt like really good for the world.
Right.
And the times where I had people, or I remember this time a spouse came up to me after a program was over and just like with tears in her eyes was like, thank you so much for creating this thing. My husband has all this confidence now and he can get a job now. And it was just like, I felt amazing to create something that did so much good. Yeah. And then, ended up moving on to other things. But that was really, a really formative time for me in my life. Through DevMountain, actually, I met a fellow education-minded entrepreneur in Phoenix, Arizona named Kelly Smith. Okay. And he had this crazy idea. He was like, what if I convinced a bunch of neighbors to send their kids to my house for school instead of to school? He had piloted this coding program with libraries where he was basically helping librarians who know nothing about code to run an entire coding program for kids after school. And so they'd build this curriculum in a way that the teachers didn't need to know a lot about. The curriculum was a lot about experimentation and project-based learning. Mm-hmm. And the curriculum and support tools they gave kind of helped these librarians feel empowered to run these coding classes, which was really remarkable. In fact, one of the things that was kind of a key finding in their early days was that they found that when they hired people who knew coding, people who were maybe, past employment, or people who had close relationships, or even coders themselves to come run these coding classes, they were less effective than when they had people who didn't run coding run these classes, which seems very counterintuitive.
But I think they were kind of teachable and humble and working almost side by side with a student.
Right. And it really spoke to learner autonomy. When these kids were kind of put in the driver's seat and told, hey, you're going to learn coding and you're in charge of it. Like,
right.
Here's some tools, but you're going to go figure this out.
Right.
They felt incredibly empowered, rather than a teacher saying, nope, don't go yet. Here's your worksheet. Here's your next thing, kind of being, spoon-fed the information.
Right.
Once these kids were given permission to learn, the sky was the limit. And they were learning way faster than the kids who were kind of on this very structured curriculum.
Track, yeah.
And so that was really, really powerful insight. And for him, who was already a very kind of learner autonomy-centered individual, he thought, what if all of school could be like this? What if school could be this thing where we provide kids with tools and structure and guidelines, but they're really kind of driving their own learning? One of the famous quotes that he used to refer to a lot was Plutarch's, education is not fanning a flame, it's
igniting a fire.
Igniting a fire, right? Kindling that fire.
Right.
And that's exactly how he felt about it. He still feels about it to this day. And so, again, we kind of consulted together. We shared a lot of ideas and commonality in how we thought about the world. And then when he tried this experiment of what if we just did all of school like this? So he took, I think, 8 junior high kids from his neighbor, kind of his neighboring community, and they all started coming to his living room for school every day. And he kind of developed this program on the fly with these kids, and it was very learner autonomy focused. It was a lot about connection and creativity and these kids being in charge of their own learning, and it was fascinating. It was fascinating to watch. From my background in education and my background in building, it was just like, how is this working? And it was the first time I'd ever seen a micro school. Now, today, micro schooling might be a concept that most people have heard or are familiar with, but at the time, nobody had ever heard of a micro school before. Nobody even knew what it was. And so we started talking about this concept of micro schools, and we thought, well, what if we could build like a program that helped parents or adults to create these micro schools in their own homes? And so we started working on that. He kind of built his first year of curriculum after taking these kids through this program. We built some software around it, and then we started kind of spreading it out to the neighboring community, and it caught fire. In Arizona specifically, there were just communities popping up all over the place that were, maybe they had really poor public schools, or maybe they were in rural areas where the schooling options were just really, really poor. And so they were like, we need this. And there were these avid kind of community, advocates and cheerleaders, champions that were so excited about, it wasn't homeschool because it had a lot of the social components. It had a lot more academic rigor than maybe a typical homeschool environment would have. And it was amazing. It was kind of this catalyst in the community where parents were way more invested in their kids' education. The kids felt way more empowered at school. And we just started seeing these incredible stories where kids would, I'm just thinking of one of many, many stories, but one kid who was struggling in school goes to micro school and ends up like jumping 2 years ahead in math because there's nobody telling him he can't, right? And a lot of the pressures and the different things that were causing him to struggle just weren't there anymore. And so it was a fascinating kind of experiment that was growing into something much, much larger. We ended up applying for and getting accepted into Y Combinator, which is like the premier startup accelerator in the world, and went to San Francisco for a summer to do that program, and then raised a bunch of venture funding and started taking it, beyond to the country. The crazy thing that happened was right after we did that, COVID hit.
Oh my goodness.
And so suddenly, what was before kind of like a very future innovative thing, microschooling, suddenly became like everyone wanted to do microschooling. And so we had thousands and thousands of parents lining up, trying to get into the program, trying to understand what it was. And it was a really challenging time for the company. If you've ever heard stories of companies that, did like a Kickstarter and it just went viral and they had millions of followers and they suddenly struggled to produce, that's kind of the way it was for us. We were in the small community and we were building this business very, kind of methodically. And then suddenly we had demand that was just exponential. and we really struggled with how to meet that demand. And
How to scale.
it was a very difficult time, and the company struggled with that. It was kind of like we grew really quickly, but we didn't even know if that was the right thing, and we had suddenly all these people inside the company, and we had to kind of reinvent how we did things. And it was one of my first experiences being in a small company that turned into a medium-sized company, because just problems change, and the way you do things changes. And for me, who came from this early startup world of a few people in a room building something, it was just a very different ballgame.
Right.
And Prenda's still doing great. They've kind of gotten over that crazy COVID time, but I'm no longer there. Partially, it just got to the point where it was too big, and I wanted to get back into building, and I wanted to be doing something that felt like I was kind of on the bleeding edge of things again.
Right.
And so took a break from Prenda for a little bit, and then ultimately ended up at School AI with Caleb Hicks. So.
Well, that's fantastic. What a journey.
Yeah.
How exciting. And so how are you seeing, now that you're with School AI, how are you seeing AI kind of shaping what you're doing and having an impact?
I think I've said this about every adventure that I've been involved in, so I don't want to overstate this, but I really believe that everything I've done in my career has led to this point.
Yeah.
Technology has always been an important enabler for learning. Just what we talked about with the internet, online courses, online learning, virtual learning, which you've had a huge part to play in. Now with AI, we have this incredible new tool that allows us to do things we've never before thought possible.
Right.
Seymour Papert, I love to quote him because it's just a great connection here. So Seymour Papert was a computer scientist and one of the first kind of early thinkers in what's called constructionist education, yes. Right? And he said this at one point. This was before the internet was big, before a lot of things. It was kind of early, computer aided learning type stuff. And he said, someday every child is going to have a tutor, a personal computer tutor in their pocket that basically does, it's like having an Aristotle in your pocket, having an expert with you at all times.
Yeah.
And that was kind of this big pipe dream, like, what would that be like to have this personal expert in your pocket? And even in the era of smartphones where we have these literal, wealth of information in our pockets, it's still not accessible in the way, like most people don't even know what to search for, right? Or how to take something really complex and break it down into something they understand, right? Like the term on Google that people use is explain it to me like I'm 5, right? Help me understand nuclear fusion in a way that I can understand who I'm not a physicist, right?
Yes, pull it down.
And so that ability to be able to take something complex and break it down requires some expert. It requires somebody to understand and personalize that and break it down for you.
Right.
And so I've always had that in the back of my mind of this kind of like, what is that going to look like? This world where we have a personal tutor that to the level of Aristotle that can help us understand anything. And AI is literally that thing. That like we're at this age, we're at this cusp where suddenly AI can do all of that for us. Now it's still early on and there's still a lot of things that need to be built and understood, but both Caleb Hicks and I come from strong backgrounds in education and technology. Right. And when ChatGPT first came out a few years ago, we both looked at each other and said, this is going to change everything.
So that was your aha moment.
That was our aha moment. Yeah. We got together and we were thinking pretty small initially. It was like, what could this do for education right now? And we thought, well, it could fill out forms for educators and it could do all the busy work that they need to do. That was kind of the small thinking.
Right.
But we had our minds also thinking of like, what could this mean? Like, what's the future look like where you have this incredibly intelligent, endlessly compassionate entity that can play a part in a child's education? And so that's where we started building from.
Okay, so we were talking a little bit about how AI is starting to transform education. How do you see that rolling out?
Well, I obviously, School AI, we feel like is a pretty important part of that. So I don't want to overly index on what we're doing, but I'll try to speak more broadly. I think the evolution we're seeing is that teachers, and I'll just say teachers broadly in the broad sense, and I mean any educator really when I say teachers. Right. Teachers are starting to realize the value of AI in their work. And usually there's kind of a progression that follows. The first thing that you realize as a teacher that you can do with AI is make your life easier. Instead of, writing lesson plans by hand or filling out forms or creating worksheets or things like that, it's like AI is really good at that stuff. I can just plug in a few things and write a quick prompt and it can spit out pretty much anything for me, which is really powerful. Yeah, so we call those productivity tools. These are tools that teachers use to make their lives a little bit easier. And it's usually just focused on generative AI, building things that they would normally be building. So it's kind of like giving the teacher a small superpower where they can just suddenly generate a lot more than they could previously. Where I think AI starts to get really interesting is where it gets right into the learning with the student. And this is something we started piloting very early on at School AI, is we thought, what if the teacher, not just using chatbots for themselves, what if the teacher could facilitate a chatbot session with a student? And the student is the one quizzing or talking to AI about, let's say, nuclear fusion, right? And what's amazing about modern LLMs, which is the core technology behind AI, what's incredible about these pieces of technology is that they are extremely good at taking something complex and breaking it down because they're trained on human language and human understanding. And so suddenly you can take a very complex topic like nuclear physics or quantum physics or whatever, mathematics, and you can break it down at the level that anybody can understand it. And so we started creating tools where teachers could create these chatbots, these chat sessions with students, and they could give it some parameters and say, okay, today we're learning about the water cycle, and I'm in my 3rd grade class, and here's the things I want you to cover. And then they can launch this chat session with students. And so the students all connect to it, similar to, say, like a Kahoot, if you're familiar with that tool. They have a code, they get in and they start chatting with this chatbot. And that became this really interesting avenue of exploration. It was kind of like, well, what are teachers going to build and what are they going to use? And we've seen incredible applications. I was just in a chemistry class last week, a high school chemistry class, and the teacher had built this entire game from an AI chatbot where the students could basically roll a dice or they could cast a spell, and they had to determine if the resulting reaction was endothermic or exothermic. And it was just amazing what this teacher had come up with. And so we created this environment where teachers could create these chatbots and share them with others. And that became a really popular thing. We call them spaces, by the way. But again, in more general terms, I think what we're starting to see is teachers realizing that AI can facilitate learning in a way that maybe they couldn't previously. And this is where it starts to get really interesting for me and where a lot of things start to come together, because one of the most important things we can do in education is personalization, right? Differentiation, sometimes it's called.
I think that's the holy grail of
education. It really is.
education.
It's been the holy grail for a long time.
Yeah.
And a teacher will tell you that meeting a student where they are is one of the most important things they can do. And in the same breath, they will tell you that it's almost impossible, especially in traditional education, because they just have too much. They have too many kids in the classroom. They have too many demands on their time. They don't have enough resources to really thoroughly understand each child and how they're doing. And there's tools and systems in place to help the students that are struggling the most. Oftentimes, you have extra teachers, you have assistants, you have remedial programs, which is great. That's important. But what about the kids who are in kind of the lower third, who are just quietly suffering? and a lot of us maybe felt like this in school. Like, what if I just didn't get math this week? And I'm not this kid over here who has a 0 in the class, but I'm also definitely not the kid who's getting it.
Yeah. And
so I'm just going to kind of figure it out and try to pretend like I know what I'm doing and slowly fall further and further behind in math until I've convinced myself that I'm not good at math at all. And I've convinced myself out of some career paths that maybe would be really good for me, like engineering or whatever. And it's that small little hinge point that changes a student's life when they suddenly convince themselves they're not good at math. And so, part of our thought has been, how do we help these students that are just kind of slowly falling behind, not really getting it, but they're not making a lot of noise, they're not asking questions. And again, AI is really good here. So again, some of our core theses include, how can we take any subject and break it down for a student and meet them where they're at? And as teachers have started using these tools, it's not just like, oh, this is really neat. It's like, I have to have this. Like, this is what I've been looking for, right? And so that's part of a lot of what we've built. Another key component of it is that AI allows us to gather and synthesize data in a way that has never really been feasible, right? We have these incredible SaaS companies that are all about big data, right, and we can take incredible amounts of data and try to make sense of them with machine learning and other things. But AI can even give us more, in the sense that, so every chatbot session that a student is having with our system, we're combing through it to find insights, right?
Patterns.
Patterns, or even just things that the teacher might want to know. For example, sure, it's good to know if the student is understanding linear algebra, but also, what if the student didn't eat breakfast this morning? Maybe the teacher wants to know that. Or what if the student didn't even understand this word you used 2 weeks ago and they still don't know what it means, right? Things like that suddenly change how a teacher is approaching their job. One of the stories that we use all the time, she actually ended up working for us, but a teacher was in a classroom. She deployed one of these chatbots to have the students all check in on it was like an oral exam that they were going to do. And they were supposed to kind of check in with this chatbot and see if they had any questions, et cetera, et cetera. And she looked through the data at the end of that, and she found that most of the students were terrified. They were woefully unprepared for this assignment.
Oh.
And she thought, oh, I better not go through with this. I better pivot, which is exactly what a teacher needs to do when they're given that information.
Exactly.
And so that's what she did. She said, hey, everybody, we're going to spend some more time on this. Don't stress. And it totally changed the way that she viewed her teaching.
Yeah.
And so suddenly when you can gather these insights and you can, generate actionable data for teachers, that's something that they've never really been able to do before.
I remember in our IP&T program, we had a stats professor that was very strict, and
I know exactly what you're talking about.
and the whole class failed the statistics test. And like the next class time, he came to class and he said, I don't think I taught you very well. And we're like all just like so relieved, because he says, I'm going to teach you a better way to do this, and we'll take the test again. Have you ever heard a teacher say that? Like, I mean, it's a doctoral program. It was pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. So when teachers have the right information, great teachers will pivot and do differently.
Yeah.
So.
Especially when it's not making their lives harder, right? Teachers are some of the most overworked and undervalued people on the planet.
And underpaid.
And underpaid too.
Yeah.
And they have some of the most scarcity of time, right? Like they just have very little time to do things. And so as much as a teacher wants to, and I truly believe the vast majority of teachers are good people who want to help. And as much as a teacher wants to help, if they just don't have enough hours in the day to help every student in that class, eventually they have to make the choice to move on, or they have to make the choice to help, to worry about their own care, right?
Right.
One of the things we hear a lot about is with, English as a second language. These students that maybe are refugees coming in from all these different parts of the world, and English is maybe their third language that they're trying to learn. And one of these students actually was talking to us, and he said, everybody wants to help you the first couple months, right? And you're behind and people feel bad for you. He's like, but after a couple of months, teacher just can't keep stopping class every time you have a question.
Right.
And so eventually you get left behind, whether you're an English as a second language learner or whether you're struggling at math or anything. And so truly meeting kids where they are is not just a nice thing. It's really
a necessity.
Essential. It's a necessity.
For sure.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been really super interesting. So in your business, like you have to have a business that's creating this.
Yeah.
Are you able to help your employees use AI to build?
Yeah, it's an interesting conundrum, right? Especially in engineering, which is where I usually spend most of my time. Right. Coders and engineers don't often like to use AI, which is kind of ironic because it's built from the same. Anyway, we were actually just talking about this week, where it's like, how can we help more engineers to catch the vision of embracing AI rather than resisting it? And I think one of my hypotheses here is I think it's hard for engineers to embrace AI because it's a different thought pattern. It's a totally different mindset. The analogy I use is sometimes I think about engineers as really good Sudoku puzzle solvers, right? Uh-huh. It's sort of like number here, pattern, number, you plug in numbers, right?
Right.
And you get really good at that. And your brain starts to fit those patterns and look for those patterns very well. Well, AI or using AI is kind of like stopping in the middle of that and saying, okay, now you have to write a really good haiku. It's a totally different part of your brain you're using. It's,
for sure.
It's creative, it's verbal, it's some reasoning and logic, and it's different. It's different than zeros and ones and bytes and bits. And so I think engineers are struggling to shift that part of their brain over to, okay, now I have to explain this problem to AI. I have to tell it what I want it to do rather than just sort of, going and it just like
more of a rote.
Exactly. So I think that we sort of as an engineering discipline in general are going to have to develop some of those verbal, reasoning skills and learn how to communicate with AI in a way that gets it to do what we want it to do.
Yeah. Communication sometimes isn't the strong suit of the engineering field.
Stereotypes are sometimes there for a reason, and I've definitely found that to be true. I think some folks tend to gravitate towards the zeros and ones because it means they don't have to do some of the other communicative things.
Right.
And I think one of the things that I'm convinced that AI is going to force us to do is become better communicators.
I agree. And I, I even think communicating with a written style, I know we don't want AI to actually write the papers for the students, but if you look at the writing style, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot to be learned from how AI is giving us that writing style. And I love some of the things that are coming out.
Well, something that's so good at writing just also happens to be a really great writing coach.
Right.
So it's like, why not use
Here's
that?
the example.
This is something we tell teachers all the time, because one of the first reactions to AI is, oh, students are going to cheat with it.
Right.
Right. That's very, very common.
Right.
And I think what we're starting to see, studies and things like that are showing students are cheating no more nor less than they were before. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
It's just how do we teach them to use these tools not as a crutch, but as a power up, right? What you have this incredible writer in front of you. Yeah, you can have it write the assignment for you, but what if you had it help you to learn how to write really well?
Exactly. It's providing that example.
Yeah.
So it's really being a mentor, a writing mentor.
Absolutely.
So I love that about it. So I know that in the broader sense, AI is basically automating a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
How do we keep the human touch in there? What things do you foresee us being able to do to help that?
It's a really important question. I think, well, first of all, going back to the teacher for a second, right? You look at how many constraints they have on their time. Right. I think what AI actually allows them to do is to have more interactions with students. So here's a scenario. You come in to teach your class in the morning, and in the back of your mind, you're thinking, okay, who do I need to be talking to today? Well, AI could tell you, here are the 4 or 5 students that really need your help today. And you could focus on those 4 or 5 individuals and use that human connection, which is what we are good at, right? Mm-hmm. I would say we've sometimes gotten education wrong in the sense that we think that the person needs to be the sage on the stage, right? Like they need to be the person sort of bestowing the knowledge on everybody.
Right.
And maybe that's a part of education, but really I think there's much more to human connection than just bestowing knowledge on somebody. It's empathy, right? It's
one of the
problem
key
solving.
Characteristics of a great teacher is
Absolutely.
empathy.
And again, I believe that most teachers are incredibly good at empathy, but do they have much chance to practice it when they have so many demands on their time and they've got 35 kids in the classroom? It's really challenging. So, we talk to teachers this way. We say, AI is not here to replace you. AI is here to give you an Iron Man suit so that you can do so much more than you could do before. Yeah. And you can do it so much more effectively. So are you still going to be communicating with students? Yes, hopefully more, and hopefully even more targeted and with more knowledge, armed with more things than you were before.
And we actually had a wonderful pilot study in the Duval School District. And this Florida's History Teacher of the Year actually did that precise thing. Mm-hmm. So he allowed the students to use our product for the students that were doing fine for the day, but then he would gather the 3 or 4 students that he knew needed some extra help, whether it was kind of an emotional thing or whatever it was, he knew because he knows his students. Yeah. And they were able to then soar. Their test scores went up 12 points. They'd never seen double digits. And it's because the students had confidence. Yeah. They felt a greater connection between the teacher and themselves. Yeah. They were empowered, just like you're saying. These are all so important. Yeah. And I don't think we can really calculate how amazing just giving one student even a greater degree of confidence that they can learn, right? Yeah. You've now hopefully set them on this path to having a passion for learning, and that you've set them on the lifelong learning path.
Absolutely.
And so that becomes so exciting. Yeah. If we can do that, if we can help teachers have less stress and more success, that's what we're all about. Yeah. Right.
One of the biggest predictors of success, studies have shown, one of the biggest predictors of success for kids in school is the quality and deepness of a human connection with the teacher. And we've done little exercises like this. In fact, our whole company got together a couple weeks ago, and we said, what's the best thing about school? When you think about school, what's the best thing? And almost every single person had a story or an experience, but it was with a person, a human being. Right. That's not going away anytime soon. Right. And in fact, hopefully we're just empowering our teachers and our students to have more of those really important connections.
And when teachers are less stressed, then they can actually share more adequately and more deeply and etc.
Absolutely.
So I think that's super important. Yeah. a lot of people are fearing that AI will take away their job. And we're talking about teachers, but more broadly, how do we tell people this isn't really the purpose of AI? How are they going to navigate those waters?
Yeah. I think it's a really good question. I mean, part of the answer I think lies in this whole, it's an Iron Man suit, not a robot to take, like
Yeah.
AI to this point, at least, barring some crazy, some crazy event, is just been assistive to humans, right? It's here to give us additional abilities on what we're already trying to do. It allows, for me specifically, if I'm writing code, it allows me to write code 2 to 3 times faster than I was before. So I'm solving more problems, I'm getting more done.
Right.
That's not taking my job, that's just making me more effective at my job.
Right.
So I think that's an important part of it. I also think it's important to remember, like if you go back to my initial story here about getting into technology and learning, the job that I would end up doing for most of my life didn't exist when I was in grade school.
Right.
And I think we need to keep that thought pattern, because my kids right now, a couple older ones are finishing up high school, but my younger ones especially, the jobs they will have probably don't even exist yet. And so it's not necessarily about learning the right specific skill right now that's going to make you money in the future. It's about learning the lifelong learning. It's about learning problem solving and critical thinking.
Critical thinking.
And one of the most important things you can learn is how to learn, right?
Right.
And if you figured that out, you can do just about anything. And I think, again, AI can help us with all of that.
Right. Increasing our critical thinking skills. And yeah, I think that's super, super important. Kalyn, thank you so much for coming. It's been so great to catch up. We've been friends for a long time, but it's like we don't get to see each other and communicate that often. So, and it's been super, super interesting to hear all of your insights and the background that you shared with us and how that's impacted what you're doing now and your passion for education. I share the same passion, and we're just excited to change the world, right?
Thanks, Linda. Yeah,
Thank you so much, Kalyn.
absolutely.